everyone, it's Melissa Moore. Thanks for joining me for episode 11 of Faith, Hope, Love, where we grow together in our faith, increase in hope, and learn how to better love God and love other people. So today's episode is a tough topic. We're going to be discussing judgment versus accountability. And in a little bit, I'm going to have my good friend Lindsay on the show here with me. She is my accountability group leader, and she has truly had such a transformational role in my life as a Christian, and I just adore her. So I'm excited to share her with you in just a little bit. But first, I want to talk about what it means to have judgment towards another individual versus holding someone else to accountability. And so we see here, again, we've been discussing the life and teachings of Jesus. Right now, we've been going through this whole Sermon on the Mount. Again, if we did the whole thing and touched every single verse, we would be here for years doing this, but I'm not going to do that. But today, I do want to discuss what Jesus says about judgment in Matthew chapter 7. He makes this statement that we are not to judge other people. But then it's a little confusing because later on, when he's talking to his disciples, he says that we are to, there's a certain way that we're supposed to hold other Christians accountable to when they fall into sin. And so where is that line? What is the difference between judging others and holding others accountable? How do we do that in practical ways today? So I want to start off right here in Matthew chapter 7 at verse 1. And Jesus says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the same measure you used, it will be measured to you." So I want to take a look briefly at the Greek word that's used for judge. It's this Greek word krino, and it literally means to proclaim justice upon someone. And as we see this word, you see this disconnect. There's the one that's judging, and there's the one that's receiving judgment. It's kind of like you would see in a trial where a judge has the ability to proclaim that someone is either guilty or innocent. There's this disconnect that the judge is not on trial. He is in this place of power and authority. And Jesus is saying that as humans, we do not have the right to do that. We do not have the ability to proclaim if someone is guilty or innocent. Only God is able to do that. And we see with this word krino, there's this disconnect, this distance between the judge and the person that's being judged. And Jesus says that is wrong. We should not be doing that. Jesus continues on. "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." And again, we see that there's this equality within humanity that, yeah, you've sinned, but so have I. And I don't have the right to come at you and say, you're doing this wrong. And we see this, that Jesus is essentially saying, you're judging other people without looking at yourself first and seeing, man, I have faults too. And I wonder to some extent if Jesus is talking first and foremost to the Pharisees and the religious leaders. We've talked about them in weeks past, that they were these people that were always looking at other people and judging them and saying, you're not doing enough to earn God's love. And they were looking at themselves with such piety and feeling like they were just like the best, when Jesus essentially tells them, you guys are totally wrong. And so essentially what Jesus is telling us today is we do not have the right to look at other people and point out their sin and their flaws without first looking at ourselves, acknowledging that we too are flawed and broken in needing of God's love. There's this idea that judgment essentially keeps this distance between us and other people. And it's essentially this heartless, uncompassionate judgment that we're pushing on other people. That it's not done out of love, but it's done almost out of control. In that in judging other people, we do not have to look at our own hurt, our own brokenness, our own sin. And Jesus says we're not to do that. But I want to contrast that to what Jesus says later on in Matthew. Later on in Matthew 18, Jesus talks about the importance of dealing with sin in the church. And this is totally different than what he talks about in judgment in Matthew 7. So here in chapter 18, verse 15, Jesus says, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. And we'll talk about the rest of it here, but I want to stop really quickly and look at the Greek word that talks about pointing out their fault. So this word for pointing out a fault is this Greek word elegeko. And it's this idea that there is this closeness in coming to someone and essentially asking for their side. Explain to me what's going on in this situation here. And so we see this really big difference between the krino, judgment, essentially looking at someone and saying, you are guilty, versus this elegecho in Matthew chapter 18 that's essentially coming alongside, sharing the truth in love and saying, friend, I love you and I care about you, but I see this sin and this brokenness in your life. Can you please explain it to me? And it's this care and this compassion in coming to someone out of love. And it's Jesus is saying, hopefully your friend will acknowledge that there's some brokenness and there's something wrong in their lives, and they will turn from that and choose to walk in health, seeking God rather than seeking maybe the sin that's been, really pervading their lives. Jesus says, hopefully they will have turned from it with you coming to them in love. But Jesus goes on and he says, but if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of two or three witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. And it's really a really heartbreaking thing that you would really hope that as a Christian that you would be able to come to another and say, hey, I see this and I have this care for you and this change that needs to happen. I'm seeing that in you. But it's a reciprocal relationship, right? That I can point out something that I see in you, but you also can point that out in me if there's something that I also need to address. It's reciprocal. But Jesus is saying, sometimes people choose to not change. Okay, but all that we are asked to do is to come into a loving kind of communication with someone and say, hey, I see this. And this happens in an intimate relationship. This is not, again, something from, somebody that you don't even know. There needs to be a closeness between these people where this can be done in a way that is loving and compassionate, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of, I just see this in you and I want your heart to be changed. It's this truth and love. And I know for me on a personal level, having accountability has been transformational in my life. Having women in my life that can look at me with care and compassion and say, Melissa, I see this in you that needs to continue to grow and improve. And I'm going to walk with you through this. I've been very thankful for this group of women that I've found here. I have an accountability group leader that she has, started a group with some women that we are honest with each other about our faults and our flaws, and we hold each other to accountability. That I have shared with them some of the most terrifying things, like I shared in episodes past about pornography being a part of my past and something that God is still working on weeding that trash out of my heart and my mind. And these women hold me accountable to doing things that are going to push me forward in health and growth. We need that, guys. But accountability has to come in a situation where everyone wants to be part of that. That people almost sign up for when you become a Christian, hey, I'm going to find a group of people that can lovingly point me towards Jesus and away from my sin and my past and my brokenness. And I want to encourage you, if you're not part of something like that, find a few friends that you trust, that you love and that they love you, and maybe talk about starting something like this where you can honestly discuss not just, being frustrated with your kids or whatever, but the real nitty-gritty parts of your life that no one else knows about. To find real change and growth in life, it doesn't happen just between us and God. Sometimes we need people to walk alongside us and show us the difficult things. Sometimes we need people to push us forward and say, you've got this. You've got this. Keep going. I'm praying for you. I love you, but I'm going to hold you accountable. And if you fall, I'm going to lift you up and we're going to keep moving forward. We need relationships like that, especially in the church. We need to be people that can lovingly hold each other accountable without this feeling of judgment. It's a really hard balance, but it's something that we have to figure out. We need to do this. We need to live in community that's healthy and loving, not just speaking love and letting our friends continue to live in ways that are not honoring to God and are not healthy for us, but instead we need to lovingly walk alongside people, pointing them towards Jesus. So I'm really excited to bring on my good friend Lindsay. She is my accountability group leader. And again, she's played a huge role in my life in holding me accountable to those really difficult things that I just didn't want to deal with. And so I feel like it's important for you to be able to hear from her a little bit about how she started this process and what it looks like to create a community of accountability. Well, thanks guys for joining me for this episode. I have my really good friend Lindsay Reid on. She's obviously a good friend of mine. She's a wife and mom of 3 kids, and she's also my accountability group leader. So I value her so much, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of hear from her about what it means to live practically with accountability in the 21st century. So so Lindsay, thanks for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Melissa.
Cool. We just did a study on Matthew 7 versus Matthew 18, just kind of looking at the idea that the church is really called to be a community of not judgment, but accountability. And so I kind of want to see what your thoughts are, why it's crucial for us as Christians to live in a community that values accountability.
Yeah, I think this is a really important topic, and one that I probably got wrong for a really long time, because accountability is so much more than just, judging people, shaming them, because we all carry this shame with us from the garden, right? From Satan. And doing accountability breaks down that shame and the power of the shame. And I know that we've seen that within our group. I've experienced that personally. And when we can move into relationships where we can be vulnerable, we will really be more open than to bringing forth our sin. And that is going to help us in our relationship with God, right? Like recognizing that sin, recognizing where we fall short, because we all do. We all have those things that we are really struggling with. And when you have someone to walk alongside you and look you in the eyes, when you say, this is a sin and it's really something that I'm very ashamed of, when you have someone who says, you know what, I am right here with you. You're right, that is a sin, and we're going to walk through this together. That is part of, I think, that Hebrews 12, right? Like we're all each other's cloud of witnesses. And there's Hebrews 11, the faith, right? We have that beautiful cloud of witnesses there, but we're practically part of that for other people too. And so being able to have that experience of someone not abandoning you, not rejecting you when you bring forth shame, that's what God does for us. So
I love that. Are there any other verses that really have inspired you with this? Like I know Hebrews 12 has been big.
Hebrews 12, and then, 1 Thessalonians 5:11, therefore encourage one another, just as you have been doing. But encouragement for me personally, if I don't know what someone is going through, it's really hard to encourage. I can give a blanket encouragement. I can say, remember the little kitten posters where they're like, hang on, right? I don't know. I love those like in school, but it's like, yeah, I can give you that general encouragement. But if I know that right now you're struggling with disciplining your child or whatever those things are, or something about me, then that is just, it's such a deeper bond. It's so much more encouragement, I guess, is felt.
Yeah. And I think that's a big thing about shame too, is like, if you were to come up and say, hey, God loves you, he cares for you, but you have no clue what's going on in my life, I could discredit that and saying, well, if Lindsay actually knew who I was, she wouldn't feel that way. And it's like through that, like, hey, let me show you my shame. Then you're able to still in authenticity say, God still loves you and God still cares for you. And so do I. Like that's so much more powerful even than just the, like the trite statements that we're so used to kind of handing out to people. But I don't know. I think just when we, again, show our shame for what it is, then we're able to really walk with each other through that. So So with that, I know this
Yeah.
is not a calling a lot of people feel called to, but I would just kind of love to hear like what that looked like for you, feeling that calling to start an accountability group, as well as was that easy or difficult for
Sure.
you?
Okay. So, and Melissa knows my story a little bit. This was really difficult. To be honest, I didn't want to do it. And so in the beginning, I actually was training to be a small group leader for an awesome organization called D Group. And I reached out to these women. Sorry, let me backtrack. I had moved across the country, so I was very lonely. So this was all spurred on by loneliness. And so it was a little selfish in my motives. And so I wanted to start a Bible study. I felt confident in Bible study. And so when I reached out to the women, they said, no, I don't want that. Like, we're busy with our lives, we're busy with all these things. So I felt a little rejected, prayed about it, and God was like, you need to start an accountability group. I didn't even know what that looked like. I had to Google, like, what are accountability questions, all this stuff. And I sent a text message out, and within 1 hour, all women had responded, that's what I'm looking for. And I went, okay, Lord, I guess we got to do this, because that was not what I had set up for. One of the things I often say, and I'm sure you've heard me say it, Melissa, is I'm really good at being authentic, and I'm terrible at vulnerability. So I can authentically tell you something, but you're not going to hear my heart behind why that's hurtful, or what that shame is stemming from. And so this accountability has been huge in practicing that vulnerability.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know for me being part of your group, this is something that I didn't know that I needed. And I mean, you obviously read all the Bible passages about living community and like telling your brother about your sins and all this stuff. But it's like, how do you actually go about finding those people? And so I know for me, I've shared in episodes past about, I did a pornography episode and it was terrifying to film. Obviously you kind of like helped kind of walk me through that a little bit, but I think the thing that this group has really brought for me is helping me to know that like I'm not by myself in my struggles, and like I can really come forward literally bearing my soul and knowing that like you guys love me and are going to walk with me through it. And so this accountability group, I mean, it's been a really big season of freedom for me for a lot of things, but especially with pornography stuff. And I think so that for me has been the impact this has had on my life personally, but I would love to hear kind of how it's impacted you on a personal level.
Yeah, I love that you said freedom, because I was going through my notes today, and that's the word. That's the word for me. And I do want to tell you a funny story about shame. So I'm going through my notes and I'm freaking out this morning because this is not something that I want. Like I enjoy, I guess. I don't know, but I love it. I'm passionate about it. Shonda texts me. So another one of our, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Another of our accountability partners texts me, and she says, how are you doing today? Out of the blue. And I just shared with her. I said, I'm really struggling with shame right now. I'm struggling with the fact that, just a couple like I'm getting some shame attacks. Like, you're not good enough. You don't, what right do you have to talk about this? Right. And just being able to share that with her, talk about it with the Lord. And yeah, and I felt freedom from it. And then it was like, okay, like, this is okay. It will be okay, But yeah, so I think for me, it's freedom. I have just, being vulnerable has allowed me to be free with other people, and also in my relationship with God. Because I think there were a lot of points that I didn't realize deep in my heart I was holding back, and had some walls up. And again, that was really unconscious. And so this has helped with that practice. Practicing vulnerability has helped me in my relationship with God, and with my relationship with other people too, and just trusting more, because that's something that I really struggle with as well.
For sure. I mean, kind of from what I'm hearing a little bit is that there's a big part of that is that like you, in order to lead a group like this, you don't have to have your life all together. And
No.
sometimes it's better that you don't, I guess, because, then you have something to share with people too.
Right. I have a lot to share.
I've got a lot to say.
I got a lot to share. Yeah.
But it's cool because it's like, it doesn't just impact your life on a personal level as far as like health development, but from like a spiritual perspective, like obviously that's the goal, is that like not just changing our unhealthy habits or whatever, but also like just being closer to God. Like that's the top priority. And I think a lot of why people come to church sometimes is because they just want their life to change, but not expecting that it's like the relationship with God is what's most important. And I know for me, that was kind of what it was when I first started accountability, was like, there were things in my life that I knew needed to change, and that was my reason for coming. But then realizing, oh my gosh, like the gift of this is like just getting to know God better.
Yes.
And accountability to that relationship too was huge. So,
well, and one of the things that I didn't think would happen that has is my faith has been hugely increased by hearing other people's stories and how God just pulls through little things, big things, and watching that, being able to be in that cloud of witnesses intimately is just, it's amazing. And I feel like my faith has grown 1,000% because I get this hands-on experience with all these little victories that God pulls out,
for sure. So one thing, like, I kind of want to talk about like the practical aspect of this.
Yeah.
Like, what does this really look like to lead an accountability group? So like maybe if you could share some of the things that we kind of discuss on a week-to-week basis, and some like maybe the questions that we kind of talk about.
Yeah. So first of all, it's a smaller group. We've tried larger groups, and I think just we lost some of the intimacy. So having a smaller group of people that you trust, we try to meet.
How many people?
I don't know. I think that really depends on the person. Some people will feel comfortable with one person, only one. Some people it'll be 2 to 3. Our group is currently 5 to 6 right now. And we have had up to 12. So, and then at that point we tried to break, and, just keeping a smaller group, I think works better. And then we meet 2 times a month. You can meet 1 time a month. I know partners sometimes meet once a month. And then we always start by centering on God, and whether that's through something that's going to focus on God, like a spiritual practice, or prayer. So we really or a Bible study. We've done a Bible study before, really just trying to focus on God just for that first 20 to 30 minutes. So we remember that we're there to be sanctified, right? Not as a therapy session. And then each of us will take about 10 to 15 minutes to go over and answer questions. The way we do it is we each answer all the questions at one time. And here are questions, and they do change, every so often, but the core questions stay the same. So how have you seen God's goodness in your life recently? That is a current question, and that has changed into how have you pursued God? How is God pursuing you? So kind of feel your group out. The second question that we always have is, what feelings, thoughts, emotions are holding you back in your relationship with God? And this is, like we were saying, the shame component really will start to come in here. Number 3, what is God teaching you right now? And one of the things that has impacted me as well that I forgot to mention is being able to look back at what God is teaching me, where his goodness is a practice for my memory, right? Like setting down the stones that the Israelites had to set to make altars. So really practicing what's God teaching you right now, and being able to look back and see that is a gift. The fourth question, do you have any unconfessed sin? And then the last question, how can we be praying for you? And then we end in prayer usually. So our goal is to have the meetings last an hour and a half. But we do like to talk, so doesn't always happen. Yeah, it doesn't always happen, but that's our goal, is an hour and a half every 2 weeks.
And there's something there that I really appreciated you saying. Like, I think it's common to want something like this just to be like a therapy session where people just like, we want to unload on each other, which is normal and healthy, that we need to have that processing happen. But I think putting God at the forefront of every time that we get together makes it different. That it's not just, because you can do group therapy with a secular therapist, and like that's great and it's helpful, but the goal is for people to see God, and like that needs to be the focus. So that's one thing I really do appreciate about our group. It is very different in that. So so I guess kind of to get closer to closing here, What would you say to someone that's looking to either find an accountability partner or to kind of create their own group? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say definitely ask someone. And if you get rejected, feel that rejection, pray about it, and ask somebody else that you trust. And I really think now is a great time because COVID, we were just talking about this, has really put a magnifying glass to our own thoughts, maybe our incorrect beliefs, and our shame. And right now is a wonderful time. So even if it's one person to join you on the journey, um, that would be, and then, talk with that person and see what questions they want to ask. But like we just kind of said, and like you emphasized, let's make it intentional about sanctification, about getting closer to God in our relationships, and being held accountable to our sin, because that's important.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, just for being willing just to kind of share your heart and the things that God has kind of called you to do and you've been like obedient to following. So thank you again for sharing that and just kind of teaching people what it looks like practically to apply accountability in our lives. So everyone, thank you so much just for joining us for this episode, and I will see you all next week.